Welcome to the Explainer. So, you've probably heard of the wisdom of crowds, right? You know, the idea that a huge group of people is almost always smarter than one single expert. But what if we've been getting a key part of that idea wrong? What if the real secret to a smarter crowd isn't keeping everyone separate, but actually bringing them together in a very specific way?
Okay, so to get into this, let's start with that classic idea. For more than 100 years, this whole concept of the wisdom of crowds has been a really big deal in how we think about group intelligence.
You've probably heard the classic example, right? You ask a whole bunch of people to guess the weight of an ox, and somehow the average of all their guesses is shockingly close to the real number. It's pretty amazing. And this idea, it works for all sorts of things, forecasting the market, even helping with medical diagnoses. But, and this is a big but, it's always depended on one single, absolutely crucial ingredient.
And that secret sauce? It's independence. The thinking has always been, for a crowd to be wise, every single person's opinion has to be kept separate. No talking, no influencing each other, because the second people start chatting, well, that's when you get into trouble. You get groupthink, you get people just following the herd, and that's when the wise crowd turns into a mad crowd. But here's where it gets really interesting. A pretty groundbreaking study decided to just flip that whole idea on its head. They asked a really wild question. What if all that social influence, the talking and the debating, what if it's not a bug? What if it's actually a feature? Let's take a look at how they even began to test something like that. So, to test this, the researchers knew a small, stuffy lab wasn't going to cut it. No, they went big, really big. They got a huge crowd together to try this whole thing out, right there in real time.
Yep, you're seeing that number right. Over 5,000 people. The whole thing went down at a live TEDx event, and the entire audience basically became part of this massive experiment. We're not talking about a sterile controlled lab here. This was a real, buzzing, interacting crowd of people.
The setup itself was actually super simple, but really clever. It had three main steps. First, everybody answered some questions all by themselves, purely individual guesses. Then, they broke everyone up into small groups, just 5 people, to talk about the same questions and try to agree on a group answer. And finally, after all that discussion, everyone got one more shot to privately change their original answer if they wanted to.
Okay, so this is the moment of truth. What happened when they actually crunched the numbers from those 3 stages? Well, the results, they weren't just a little surprising. They were, frankly, mind-blowing.
First up, they calculated the classic wisdom of the crowd. They took every single one of those 5,180 initial private guesses and just averaged them out. And hey, it worked pretty well, just like the textbooks say it should. It slashed the average error by more than half. That's a great result, and it shows the power of a big, independent crowd.
But then, they tried something different. They took the answers from just 4 of those little debating groups. We're talking a total of only 20 people, and averaged their group answers together. And, get this, the result was way more accurate than the average of the entire 5,000-person crowd.
The researchers themselves said it best. Just let that sink in for a second. The combined answer from 4 tiny groups that talked to each other was smarter than the combined answer from over 5,000 people who didn't. So how on earth is that even possible?
Yeah, this result feels like it breaks all the rules, right? We've been told forever that social influence is the enemy. So how could adding more of it suddenly make the crowd smarter? Well, the answer is actually pretty elegant.
It's the obvious question, and it's a good one. We've all been in meetings where discussion just leads to everyone nodding along with the loudest person in the room. But what the research has found is that this kind of discussion has 2 totally different effects on the diversity of opinion.
So check this out. It's a total paradox. Inside any one of those little groups, people's opinions started to look more alike. They talked, they reasoned, they converged on an answer. But here's the magic trick. The final answers between the different groups actually got more varied, more diverse. It's like each group went down its own unique path of reasoning, so you didn't have one big herd all stampeding in the same wrong direction.
It's like you get the absolute best of both worlds. On one hand, that small group debate helps weed out the really wacky individual ideas and helps everyone produce a more thought-out answer. But then, by averaging the answers from all these different, independent groups, you still get that powerful diversity of thought. That's why they call it a crowd of crowds.
Of course, the researchers had to be sure. Was this real, genuine discussion? Or were people just taking an easy shortcut? Maybe they just averaged their initial numbers, or maybe everyone just caved and went along with the most confident person. They needed to find out what was really going on inside those groups. So in another experiment, they just flat out asked people, hey, how did you guys actually come up with your group answer? And look at this data. It couldn't be clearer. The number one strategy, by a long shot, was that they shared arguments and reasoned together. This wasn't some cheap trick or mindless groupthink. It was the real deal. People were actually talking and thinking together.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second. What does all of this actually mean for us? Because this is more than just a cool experiment. It really suggests a whole new way to make better, wiser decisions.
The big takeaway, the real insight here, is a powerful new instruction. Don't just pull a giant disconnected crowd. Instead, build a crowd of crowds. The trick is to structure the conversation. Let people debate and reason in small, independent groups, and then combine the wisdom of those groups. It turns social influence from a problem to be avoided into a powerful tool you can actually use.
And you can see how this could be a game changer in so many areas. Imagine teams of doctors, where each small team debates a tough case and then their conclusions are combined. Or picture designing public policy not in one giant chaotic meeting, but by weaving together the refined ideas from dozens of small community groups. It's a new playbook for tackling really hard problems.
So this really leaves us with a pretty big idea to chew on. For so long, we've trusted two things: the single lone genius or this massive crowd of disconnected people. But what if the true path to getting smarter together isn't about being alone or being in a giant mob? What if it's all about connection? Maybe the real secret to solving our biggest problems lies in having and then combining just a few really, really good conversations.